Hello, I'm Dr. Katherine Horton. My lords, my lady, I'm appealing to you in a case of national emergency. I would like to make the entire statement under oath because what I'm talking about sounds rather unbelievable, but I would like to basically make the statement such that it is legally binding in a way that you will recognize. I am using the witness affirmation according to the Oath Act 1978. I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. My lords, my lady, I have been to court myself, trying to go up against these issues. I have talked to the police, I've talked to the High Court, I've approached the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, I have talked to the Attorney General, I've written to him, both in Switzerland and in the UK. I have approached the police, the federal police in Germany about these matters, and none of them were willing to help. I also approached the German ambassador to Switzerland, and he too refused to assist. This is why I'm also approaching you. However, it's not just in my own cause that I'm approaching you. It is also because through this process I discovered that what is affecting me is affecting thousands of other victims in the UK, and they have been ignored by the police and presumably also by the courts. And essentially what I would like to talk to you about is matters of the greatest and gravest importance. I don't say this lightly, but I came to the conclusion that the British intelligence agencies, in collaboration with other European agencies, are committing crimes against humanity. And the failure of victims like me to find any remedy through the police or through the courts, I think derives from the fact that the intelligence agencies wield an enormous power over all these institutions, sometimes overtly, sometimes more clandestinely. The situation is that we have a new type of weapon called electromagnetic weapon, and these weapons come in different forms, but they seem to be tested at will on the civilian population at large. I am not making these statements up. They are also backed up by high-profile whistleblowers. The nature of these weapons has been confirmed by Dr. Barry Trower. Other whistleblowers in the UK are Carl Clark, who worked for British intelligence, amongst others. And Carl Clark in particular came forward in the year 2009, so 8 years ago, in the German press, and said that the intelligence agencies in Europe, including British intelligence and German intelligence, are attacking the civilian population with these electromagnetic weapons. And I think they are running human experimentation, I think they're running weapons testing, and I think a lot of the agents are just living out their own sadism. But what is so incredibly insidious about these electromagnetic weapons is that they essentially can be used to attack people behind walls. And what the intelligence agencies are doing is that they are assaulting the civilian population inside their own home. I know it sounds incredible, but I include the link to a scientific paper which states clearly that the frequencies, and these include part of the frequencies that we're talking about here, are such that normal building material is essentially as good as transparent. So the radiation is transmitted at 50% or more, and glass transmits this sort of radiation to 100%. And what is being done is that civilians are being assaulted with essentially microwave beams inside their own home. This causes bruising, this causes internal damage and brain damage, and they are being shot into with pulses, with pulsed beams that bruise up their bodies, that damage their teeth, that give them organ damage or brain damage. And this is done in the most callous and premeditated fashion imaginable, and it has been going on for years. my own background is such that I actually originally fled Transylvania with my parents. My parents are Hungarians and Germans, and we settled in Germany in the mid-80s. And I finished my school career in Germany. I skipped year 9 on merit, and I came top of the year, which allowed me to go to Oxford, where I completed my first degree in physics, obtaining a first class. And then subsequently I did a PhD, or a DPhil as it's called in Oxford, in high energy physics. I have worked at a large accelerator site called DAISY, the German Electron Synchrotron in Hamburg, and I also worked at CERN. But I found that even my skills as a high energy physicist were not enough to analyze in detail this classified military technology that's being used on the population. However, there are many, many high-profile whistleblowers who have come forward about this now. In addition to Dr. Barry Trower in the UK and Carl Clark, who was an agent and actually confessed that he also knew about people being attacked, and that he didn't attack them themselves, but there were specialist teams who would be doing the irradiation of civilians. So we have really detailed whistleblowers. There are also American whistleblowers. One of them is Dr. Robert Duncan, who worked for DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And another one who also is publicly named is Dr. Paul Baccio. And between them, what they said, Dr. Paul Baccio said that civilians are being assaulted with microwave radiation from cell towers, from mobile phone towers. Dr. Robert Duncan went into greater detail, and he described a terrifying technology that is used to attack not just the population with microwave beams, but also to interfere with their cognitive function, with their brain. And I fear that these experiments are being done also in the UK and by British intelligence abroad on the civilian population. It is, I don't just think, I know for a fact, and British agents have confirmed that the experiments being done, the human experimentation being conducted on the civilian population, is essentially a follow-on from the death camp experiments. And the horror and the suffering of the victims inside their own home certainly is the equal of the suffering of the people in the death camps. And I do not approach your lordships and your ladyship lightly, but we have reached a situation whereby the intelligence agencies have essentially denied all cooperation on this matter. What happened in my situation is that I'm a researcher. I'm originally a high energy physicist, as I said, but I got interested in studying complex human systems. I have analyzed, for example, the English court system. I also have written to the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court being streamed live, it was a treasure trove of information, and I actually wrote to some of your lordships and your ladyship in the past about ideas of how to make the process more efficient. It might have seemed trivial to you, but for my generation, this is one of the big issues we are dealing with here, because as Lord Toulson also expressed in a speech, the legal system is in many ways at breaking point. The number of laws, some of them are intelligible and so on, but also the expense, especially with the cuts to legal aid, they are now more topical than ever. And I have, in my own way, tried to make a start and open up the discussion. However, what your lordship and your lordships and your ladyship didn't know at the time, by the time I was writing to the court, I had already been targeted by British intelligence for several years. My targeting started very quickly as soon as I changed fields out of high energy physics and changed into, after spending a brief time in medical physics, I took up the study of complex human systems, and my first court case, or my first case study I should rather say, was a court case, and that was Abramovich, or Berezovsky versus Abramovich in the English High Court at the time. And I visited that court case to find out how the English legal system works in detail. I was there I joined, I think, on the 30th of October, the 31st of October, and I was there all the way until the end. And my targeting by British intelligence started, I think, in the first week. I noticed that I was being followed home, rather demonstratively actually, from the Rolls building in London to Oxford. And at first I didn't say anything about that, and I didn't even mind because I thought it is just a regular MI5 operation. However, what happened is that after that, my stalking, surveillance and harassment didn't stop. It has followed me ever since. After a year of harassment and what I now know to be called street theatre, which is street spectacles put on by MI5 agents to disconcert, to intimidate and harass. After a year of that, and after demonstrative break-in into my home in Oxford, it followed me abroad. It followed me to Germany, where it was continued by German intelligence. But people who had stalked me in the UK also turned up in Germany. They turned up within 50 meters of my home. I also have reason to believe that it was partially sexually motivated. I think after a while, these agents realized that I wasn't a threat. Nevertheless, I was kept on, and these agents really lived out, I think, their own predilections, voyeuristic or otherwise. However, I remind you, Lordships, I'm not pleading for my own case. This is just how I ended up on this program that I now discovered is essentially run nationwide in the UK and also across the entirety of the Western world. It all stems from the same problem, which is the incredible power that the intelligence agencies have accumulated in recent years. I know for a fact, and it has been reported amongst others in The Guardian, that the MI5 budget after 2003 doubled. The headcount, however, tripled. And what this means in real terms, as I've learned, is that the human intelligence, amongst others, has been expanded vastly, and they have an incredibly large street surveillance network, which the victims actually refer to as gang stalkers. The way the surveillance is conducted these days is most of the time very overtly, in fact. After this started happening to me, I tried to approach lawyers, and every single time I did, horrible things started happening to my family, very unusual things, in fact. And the things that happened to them can all be traced back to these new types of weapons, which is electromagnetic weapons. And in every case, I can actually trace it back to the best of my knowledge. What has then happened is that lawyers advised me to keep quiet about it because, as one lawyer in Germany put it, there's nothing we can do about the intelligence agencies. However, my targeting has become ever more brutal, ever more violent, and ever more ferocious. After being irradiated several times in Germany, once from a helicopter with an electromagnetic weapon that I now know is to be used for crowd control, it emits intense waves, and one, as a victim being irradiated with this, one feels intense waves passing through one's body, akin to being in a swimming pool and being next to the high pressure water jets, essentially. I was irradiated by that device from a helicopter, and the next time in my home. The helicopter actually irradiated me on my own rooftop terrace in a very demonstrative fashion. My husband and I, we moved to Switzerland, and the targeting continued. Here we had a second break-in into our home, and when I said in my own home that I shall report this to the police and that I had enough, I was for the very first time overtly assaulted with what now I know to be microwave weapons. They cause intense burning, and one can know that it's a microwave weapon, it's a microwave beam, because essentially placing a hand above the aching area on the body, one can actually transfer the pain onto the back of the hand, and one can map out a beam. And I was assaulted non-stop with beams like that ever since that incident, which was in January 2016. Because everything that I'd experienced was a direct follow-up from what happened to me in Britain, and because I had actually recognized some of the people who did the stalking from the stalking incidences back in Britain, I decided to investigate. I got to know about a court case in the High Court, which was very similar to mine. It is called Philip Kerr. At the time it was called Philip Kerr versus Attorney General. It was heard in the High Court in I think February 2015. The court reference is square brackets 2015 EWHC 934, and it was in the Queen's Bench division. And I actually went to the UK. I flew to the UK to actually listen to the follow-up case, because it was passed from the High Court to the Investigatory Powers Tribunal. And there it became known as Philip Kerr versus MI5. Your Lordship, Your Ladyship will find information about that if you just search online for Philip Kerr versus MI5. The businessman Philip Kerr accused MI5 of having stalked and harassed him over 13 years, in fact. What was interesting is that after the hearing in front of the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, I spoke to Philip Kerr and also his partner. Philip Kerr described in great detail the harassment he's experienced, and he showed me extensive evidence, detailed evidence on his mobile phone, which his partner actually confirmed. And the harassment he experienced was virtually identical to mine. Philip Kerr's harassment also followed him from the UK to Thailand. And his legal team also found an explanation of why the stalking and the surveillance of people on what I assume must be blacklists or surveillance lists is done in such an overt fashion. His legal team said that's because RIPA, the regulation of the Investigatory Powers Act, only covers covert surveillance. So it is assumed, I think, in intelligence circles that overt surveillance does not fall under RIPA. It's probably not the most unusual legal argument Your Lordships and Your Ladyship have heard. And having followed the Supreme Court through the live stream over a 1 year period, it's also not the most unusual thing I've heard. So I do find that credible. And as I said, this was uncovered by legal professionals. And the problem I'm now facing is that after I heard about that, I realized that British intelligence can still be involved in my harassment, even though I have moved to Germany and Switzerland. And I tried to approach the High Court, trying to get an emergency injunction against them. At first, I actually contacted the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, and when I searched their website, my targeting here in Switzerland became extremely intense. I received painful shots to all sorts of body parts, and it was essentially done live. As soon as I searched and as soon as I went onto the Investigatory Powers website, it had physical consequences for me here in Switzerland. I submitted a complaint thereupon in a rush, not providing any evidence because I became under such an assault, essentially. I was shot into non-stop every couple of seconds as I was trying to prepare, that I just in a panic submitted a complaint. I also contacted German intelligence and I wrote to them and I requested a cease and desist. What happened is that a day or two after that, I was assaulted on an airplane. I had the back of my head irradiated painfully. Subsequently, I was irradiated in Spain so painfully that they damaged my hip permanently. After that experience, I returned. It was a weekend outing, and actually on the way back in Spain, I also emailed German intelligence again, and I told them that what had happened to me, and I asked them again to cease and desist. What then happened is that on the flight back, the young man in the row behind me who had irradiated me on the way there was sitting in a row behind my husband and myself again. And on the flight, my leg was knocked by the passenger next to me. And when I turned to look at her, I saw that she was looking down on her mobile phone. And her mobile phone showed an image of my father in an aircraft cabin, in the clothing that he wore on the day that he flew out to join us in Spain. So these are the sort of hints and tricks that I experienced, and after that experience I essentially flew straight to London and I approached the High Court in a panic. On the morning when I left, I received a letter from the Investigatory Powers Tribunal who put down my case as frivolous and vexatious. And I then approached the High Court. On the way to the High Court, I received what I afterwards realized was a veiled death threat. A man essentially talked to me on the bus from the airport to my hotel room, and after a lot of small talk he suddenly said, "There's crime in every country, however in some countries it is just more hidden." And he repeated that twice, and then after a pause he said, "Did they kill Diana?" And I just looked at him and I replied, "I don't know," not knowing who they were meant to be. I went into the hotel room where my husband was staying at the time on a business trip. The next day I went to the High Court and I appeared before Judge Spencer, on the 19th of May. Judge Spencer informed me that he can't actually give me an emergency injunction without having a hearing on notice, so he adjourned to the 16th of June. I returned to my hotel room, and shortly after returning, I started being shot in the back of the head with a microwave gun by what I assumed to be MI5. Being shot into the head by a microwave gun, as it was done at the time, feels like what I say. I can only describe it as having large nails shot into one's skull with an industrial nail gun. And I received, I think, 24 shots into the back of my head before collapsing on the floor from pain. Because my targeting had already been quite substantial at the time, I was carrying aluminium foil, so metal foil, with me at all times. And after just recovering, I put aluminium on my head, several layers, to protect myself, and I waited until my husband returned. When my husband returned, I got up, dropping the aluminium, and I was trying to tell him what had happened to me that day, and the shots resumed. I received again 12 shots or so, until I collapsed in pain in front of my husband, writhing in pain. This is what happened to me, and I had also been demonstratively stalked back from the High Court. I think through that I entered the history books as probably the first litigant ever to be assaulted, physically assaulted, straight after a High Court hearing by the respondents. My court case is registered as Dr. Katherine Horton versus SIS, MI5 and GCHQ. SIS being the Secret Intelligence Service, which in the olden days used to be called MI6. What happened to me then is that I returned to Switzerland with my husband, and 3 days later, 3 days after the veiled death threat referring to Lady Diana, I survived an assassination attempt on the motorway in Switzerland. I was driving through a tunnel at the time, and I received painful shots to my forehead and to my eyes, which was so intense I almost lost orientation, almost crashing into the walls of the tunnel. I said to my husband that I'm being attacked, and I swerved out of the lane that we were in, and as soon as I swerved out of the direct line of sight between the cars behind us and in front of us, the pain stopped and we narrowly survived. And this was, as I said, on a motorway strip going through a tunnel, so we were traveling over 100 kilometers per hour at the time. After that, the microwave shots into my body became so intense I had to flee my home here in Switzerland. Also the day after this assassination attempt that I experienced, opposite my home, a black, life-size goat appeared on a flat rooftop. I only mention the goat not because I attached any importance to it myself, but rather because I found out that the intelligence agencies make references to satanic symbols when they are assaulting their victims. And I also spoke to MI6 whistleblowers who confirmed as much. And this black goat is still opposite my home, and essentially my targeting that I experienced just increased in psychopathology after that. And I'm telling your lordships and your ladyship this not because I find myself particularly important and I want to put myself in your attention above everybody else. I'm telling you because I'm one of those few victims who actually tried to approach the High Court in this matter. And what I have experienced is almost typical for other victims. What then happened is that after being in hiding for 2 weeks, and being actually bruised up by microwave shots into my body the first time I left the house, I returned from my parental home where I'd been in hiding. I came back to Switzerland and I was trying to prepare a court case. In that time I had painful microwave beams shot into my body, into all sorts of body parts, non-stop. Nevertheless, I tried to do my best. However, 2 weeks were just not enough to research this classified technology and prepare a court bundle. So I went back to the High Court and I appeared in front of Judge Edis on the 16th of June, and I asked for time extension. And what happened is that Judge Edis granted the time extension. The legal team for the respondents were also present, and the case was adjourned to the 25th of July. I returned to Switzerland, and this time the assaults exploded, and essentially they started a new mode on me, which is essentially direct brain interference. It sounds incredible, but then again, we all know that the brain can be interfered with quite easily. Anybody who tried to work in a library while people were making noise or were whistling knows that the human brain is very easy to disrupt. What is new is that these days it can be done with electromagnetic weapons, and the arms industry and the so-called military intelligence complex has worked out in detail how to disrupt people. In those 6 weeks I was granted by Judge Edis as a time extension, I had, I think, every single mode that these electromagnetic weapons can be used in, tried out on me. I was essentially shot into non-stop in my own study, in my bedroom at night, in my kitchen, wherever I went. And essentially I also received a new mode of attack, which was directly interfering with my brain and giving me crippling symptoms, which was emotional changes, which I now know from Dr. Barry Trower can be achieved with these microwave weapons, but also total lack of concentration, lack of focus, and incredible fear and mental paralysis. All of these can be achieved with these electromagnetic weapons. I did my best, and I assembled a court bundle which comprised a statement by the MI6 whistleblower Carl Clark that most likely I'm being attacked by MI5, and they said special branch on me. And then also I managed to assemble details about this classified military technology from leaks, from press reports about it. I pointed the High Court to the fact that already in the German press, already back in 2002, there was an article about neighbors attacking other neighbors with microwave weapons and causing horrific injuries and horrific symptoms. So this technology is now public. However, what then happened is that I didn't actually have time to put together the other part of my evidence, which was to do with my own personal evidence, because it comprises 5 years. And I returned to the High Court begging for another time extension. I submitted also frequency measurements, which referred to frequencies that were mentioned by the DARPA whistleblower, Dr. Paul Baccio, as being directly used to interfere with human brains. And I submitted measurements about those and about these frequencies being measured in my study as I was trying to prepare for the High Court case. However, Judge Holgate didn't think that those were valid, and essentially terminated my case. I also have to say that I've tried for months trying to find legal assistance. However, I was turned down by every lawyer upon mentioning the intelligence agencies. And I was also turned down by the Bar Pro Bono unit. And I was essentially representing myself. The transcripts and the court order can be seen on my website, which is stop007.org, under court cases and evidence. And I have since made my case public on the Richie Allen show. And I was forced to make my case public because after the end of my court case on the 25th of July, I received death threats by phone. Also, I received other hacking attacks. My computers were hacked. External hard disks with evidence were corrupted. 2 external hard disks in a row within 12 hours were corrupted. Evidence videos that I had shot since then have disappeared. And my aim is to go back to the High Court, and essentially I would like to follow proper procedure. But what happened in the months after my court case is that these things happened: hacking, subversion, but worst of all, the physical assaults on me have now ramped up to a point where I was essentially debilitated. I was trying to weather this. I was trying to also go to other countries. However, I have been now physically assaulted by agents in the Netherlands, in Spain, in Germany, in the UK, in Switzerland, non-stop in my home, but also in Italy. And interestingly, what your lordships will not and your ladyship will not find in the transcript is a rather obvious question which was posed by both Judge Spencer and Judge Edis. And the question, especially by Judge Edis, was, but why would anybody persecute you like that? And my reply at the time was, and I know that for a fact because I shall never forget, the face expression on Judge Edith's face, my reply was, "My lord, the most pessimistic view is that this is a decentralized NATO assault system against dissidents." And that passage, the question by Judge Edith and my reply, has been scrubbed from the transcript by what I presume to be the respondents, MI5. And my lords, my lady, this is precisely why I address you directly, because I believe that MI5 has essentially provided us with the answer. They scrubbed it because it was true. No one would just scrub the random rantings of a madwoman from a transcript, but they scrubbed this. And I think it's because it's true. I have accumulated now evidence. High-profile whistleblowers came forward and said that they are willing to assist me. I'm in touch with high-profile whistleblowers in the US, NSA whistleblowers, very high-profile ones. Also, a lady whistleblower called Katherine Horton, who's experiencing exactly the same as I am experiencing. And it was essentially from her that I received excellent advice about how to shield oneself against these attacks. And I had built, being a physicist, I had done my best to build shielding, which I had to use in my own study and in my own bedroom to shield myself against essentially this military technology shooting into my body non-stop. And Katherine Horton said to me, well, what I do when they don't let me sleep is that I sleep in the bathtub, putting shielding on top, almost like a coffin. And that's what I had to do whilst my husband was away. I had to essentially build my shielding and sleep in the bathtub. And this is the reality of us victims. I have now done my best. I have done my best throughout my life. My supervisors at Oxford, who were Professor Robin Devenish during my DPhil, and Professor Tony Whiteberg, who's very often in the press about CERN and the work that we used to do there, they can all attest to the fact that I'm a person of high integrity, that I never lie, and especially Professor Whiteberg can attest to the fact that I always say the truth and I'm not going to shy away no matter what personal consequences that has for me. And my lords, my lady, I'm approaching you now because the situation is that the intelligence agencies in Britain, but also elsewhere, have so run out of control. They're mutilating people inside their own home in large numbers. They're using these microwave weapons to assault innocent civilians inside their own home, showing complete disregard for human rights and for any bounds of sanity, in fact. They have built up incredibly large systems of stalkers, akin to the Stasi surveillance systems and the COINTELPRO programs in the US. And they are now shooting into people's bodies with what essentially are microwave weapons, but another way to call them is cancer weapons. Microwaves, as Dr. Barry Trower can attest, cause cancer. And certainly when a beam passes into a human body at such an intensity that it causes intense pain, then for sure it also seeds tumors. And I have now been shot into non-stop for over a year inside my own home in Switzerland. The agents, who I recognize to be agents from the UK, but also German agents, have essentially debilitated me. These agents have also mocked me as a victim. The night before my third hearing in front of Judge Holgate, I essentially went for a walk just to calm down. And my mobile phone had gone flat, the battery was flat, so I left it in the hotel. And I just went for a walk down to Trafalgar Square and down to St. James's Square, just to calm down the night before I had to represent myself for the third time. And on my walk, MI5 put on a street theatre where they caught me just behind St. James's Square, between the antique dealers, close to the Economist building. And a man cycled towards me, zigzagging in the street, and this was at 11:30 p.m. at night. And he was trying to catch my attention. He was dressed in full head-to-toe camouflage and had a large German flag sewn onto his uniform. And he was also wearing a large helmet that had green LEDs running around his head, flashing. And as soon as I saw him, after having been exposed to this for now over 5 years, these street theatre scenes, I already assumed it's somehow targeted at me. But he also slowed down on his bike, stopped next to me and said something that I couldn't catch. However, what MI5, I think, has spelled out to me there was German military mind control or German military brain monitoring. And this is precisely what has happened to me after my third appearance at the High Court. I received incredibly painful microwave beam shots into my skull. They started doing something that is now known to be remote neural monitoring, which Dr. Robert Duncan, the DARPA whistleblower, talks about in great detail. And it's using the fact that our ability to measure electric fields has so advanced that electric fields or electromagnetic fields created by the brain activity of a person can be read out remotely. We are still investigating how they're doing it in detail, if they're using implants or other. There are also horrible things that intelligence agencies have known to use, like implants, non-consensual implants on victims. But there are also other horrible things like little chips that essentially self-assemble inside the body. What's also quite telling is that 70% of the victims of the intelligence agencies are women. And all the victims who have tried to come forward to the police and other places have been smeared with schizophrenia and paranoia. However, it is just a medical fact that the sufferers of schizophrenia and paranoia are 60% male, whereas the people who complain about being shot into with microwave weapons and being stalked and harassed by the intelligence agencies are 70% female. Now, the sex ratio is also indicative of sexual violence and war crimes. So it's for this reason, and it's because I've on my own body experienced what the intelligence agencies are doing to victims, that I'm approaching your lordships and your ladyship with the accusation that intelligence agencies are committing war crimes. I am confident that this is what is going to turn out. I personally know about the existence of hundreds of victims, and I've heard about the existence of thousands and tens of thousands of victims. Some people claim the victims run into the millions. These covert programs of human experimentation have been going on for decades, but now, because of the explosion in the intelligence agency budgets, as part of the war on terror, this human experimentation for what looks like for the pharma and the weapons industry has exploded. The things that are being done to the victims are truly horrific. I haven't even mentioned half the things that are done, but I think that's for the better, because I think already your lordships and your ladyship have heard enough. I am approaching you as a group because the situation is that I have tried to approach the police, and I've put online intimidation theatre that was staged by MI5. I put this up on my YouTube channel, which is called Stop 007. I've also put up evidence and desperate pleas to the German ambassador, MI5 directly, Andrew Parker, head of MI5, and Dr. Bruno Karl, head of the German intelligence agency, Bundesnachrichtendienst, directly. I have emailed these men. I've made public appeals to them to cease and desist repeatedly, which have been ignored. These public requests can be seen on my Twitter channel, which is stop007org, all one word, and they can be seen there. And essentially the situation I find myself in is that I have incredibly painful microwave beams being shot, literally shot as pulses into my brain non-stop at night now, and during the day as well. And now, after I went public on UK radio, on something that's also found online, the Richie Allen show, after that I started being physically tortured and mutilated with a ferocity that even after I think 10 months by then, or 12 months of torture by that time, was new to me. I'm now essentially being crippled, and I've noticed the last couple of weeks that they particularly target my brain. It's essentially being shot to pieces by microwave weapons. I'm approaching your lordships and your ladyship because the criminality we're dealing with is now truly out of bounds. I believe that you all are members of the Privy Council. You do have a voice, and most importantly, you also do understand the importance of the rule of law. And I'm not sure if it's here on my cupboard, but I do have, essentially it is here. As a matter of fact, I do happen to have Tom Bingham's The Rule of Law here. I have read the book, and I can confirm that everything that's in this book is now being contravened by the intelligence agencies with an arrogance and with essentially jeering, sadistic mocking, and utter psychopathology towards the victims. And I consider that to be truly a national state, an international state of emergency. I myself am now a German citizen since my parents fled to Germany in the mid-80s. However, my husband is British. My husband also graduated Oxford top first. He came top of his year at Oxford, and he's got a DPhil in theoretical high-energy physics. We're both highly educated. He has also been targeted. They've been doing a lot of experiments on him in his sleep, which I noticed by placing my hand on his skull in his sleep as he was moaning from pain, and realizing that there was an intense beam because it was essentially punching through my hand and causing pain in my knuckles. And essentially we are now being mutilated to death with microwave weapons. What is being done to me is essentially repeated pulse shots to the forehead, which is essentially microwave lobotomy. Over Christmas I've been tortured seamlessly, essentially, so German intelligence takes over what Swiss intelligence does. But also I went back to the UK in October to attend the court hearing of another whistleblower, who I personally believe is the victim of an MI5 takedown operation. His name is Dr. Stephen Frost. He was the lead doctor campaigning to have the death of Dr. Kelly investigated. And as I was in the UK, I was essentially shot into the back of the head, travelling from Heathrow up to Manchester where the court case was taking place. And I was shot into exactly the same position on my skull as in my own kitchen here in Switzerland. So British intelligence is involved, and I beg you, my lords, my lady, to please speak up on behalf of the victims, because we by now do not know what to do. Thank you for listening.